Mike, can you just tell us about how you got involved, particularly in South Africa, over this last year and a half, with the big companies here?
Uh, I suppose these things in the end come down to sort of fairly personal sorts of events. I was coming in and out of South Africa to visit Nat and Helen and the children, grandchildren. It's a very powerful magnet in these situations. And in the course of doing that, I got introduced to the lady Lindy Engelbrecht, who was running the Institute of Directors, and they were running a big event to launch the King 3 Corporate Governance Code. I got invited to speak on Chapter 8 of that code, which is about relationships with stakeholders. So I spoke at that event, and then at a subsequent Institute of Directors event, I was also speaking when um, uh, a local person, Ngaba Lope, forgive my pronunciation, Ngaba, if you're listening to this, was present, and he said to me, look, he'd studied the web for a while, he knew a lot about public relations. He said to me, look, I think you really do have the best way of measuring relationships that I've been able to track anywhere, which was a great compliment, I thought. But I wonder whether you'd help us to start to measure relationships to satisfy the requirements of King 3. And for some reason, I never put that together. I never seen that opportunity, but he saw it clearly. So he then went out and sold the idea to quite a number of large corporates. And in the end, 5 of them signed up with us, some of the largest companies in South Africa, to do a pilot project to test out this methodology in the South African context. So we work very closely with the company that he and Michael Lash established called Stakeholder Relationship Assessments, SRA. We work closely with SRA to test out this methodology with 10 stakeholders for each of the 5 companies. So that gave us 50 stakeholder relationships to look at, and as there were 2 people within the stakeholder and 2 people in the company for each of those relationships, that gave us a sample of 200 questionnaires that were administered by SRA. We then did the analysis, fed back the results to the companies, and all of them have been delighted with those results and want to go ahead and do some more work on this now.
And were these small or medium-sized companies?
No, they're all just huge companies. And when we ran a meeting at the Institute of Directors at the end of that process, which was in early December last year, another 10 or 15 companies came to that meeting and clearly were so interested in what was going on that they were talking about doing some further work. So there is a huge amount of interest that's been generated.
Tell us what kind of impact this pilot project has had on these companies.
I think it's too early to say, really. We only finished it at the end of November last year, so we're not really sure how much the executive committees of these companies or the boards of these companies have taken up these results, have heard these results and studied them. I suspect there's a process going on internally with each of these companies. I've got no doubt that it's made an impact on individuals who are involved in the process, but I think in terms of changing corporate culture, it's too early to say. In the UK, our experience has been that our interventions with companies, as we've gone into measured relationships, has led to quite a lot of quite major changes in the way those companies operate on a day-to-day basis. So they've changed working practices. I'm not sure that we could say yet that we've changed or transformed whole organizations in the way that they think and operate. But that is definitely where we are going. That's where we want to be. We want to be able to shift the whole framework or ethos of a company, right from the way the board works and thinks, right down to the way that they collect data on every interview and discussion that they hold with clients or with suppliers and customers. We want to see all of those things change to reflect this relational way of seeing the world.
And you've also created something called the Relational Business Charter. Is that something of is that a guide for companies or a blueprint? I mean, what does that serve?
Well, once you get hold of the idea that a company is not just about all sorts of people serving the interests of shareholders, but you start to say, well, really all of these different interest groups are important to the success of a company. And I think that's widely held around the world now, not just in South Africa. I think more and more people are saying all over the world that there needs to be what's called integrated reporting, which is not just reporting on the company's own results, but how the company has impacted on the local community and the other stakeholders in the course of its work. That's called integrated reporting. As soon as you get hold of that idea, then you start to ask some fairly fundamental questions about what's going on in companies. So, for example, companies, we agree, these big companies are very powerful organizations. I mean, we're not talking about something which you and I can just tread on and squash like an ant. We're talking about powerful institutions. How is it that we don't know the names of the owners of these organizations? I mean, the people who are the shareholders are often anonymous. They may be hiding behind some trust structure in the Cayman Islands. And when you try and chase after that, it takes you 10 years to find out who is behind this name, this trust name. And by then they've moved anyway because they heard you're coming. How is it that we've allowed ourselves to get in a position where the owners who influence who these companies are controlled by day to day by their boards, because they choose who's on the board, how come we don't know who they are? Or how come that we have an annual general meeting and the only stakeholder who's invited the annual general meeting is the shareholder? How come the employees are not invited to the annual general meeting of a company? How come the suppliers or the customers or the local communities and all the other people who are affected by the company, how come they're not invited to the annual general meeting? So the Relational Business Charter that we developed here, which is available on the Relationships Global website, if any of you want to read it, is an attempt to say, look, here are 10 points by which we can assess whether a company is relational or not, or how relational it is. And what we want to see is a relational ratings agency established, like a credit ratings agency, to look at how relational each company is. So what we're taking is the general theme of relationships at a theological level, which comes out of our study of the biblical material, and we're trying to say, how do we apply that in very practical ways into different parts of society? It may be into the running of a school or a hospital or a prison, but it can also be in the running of companies. And we've decided to particularly focus on the running of companies as the first area where we do our work.
So you're anticipating being able to do similar analyses and projects with other sectors as well, is that right?
Yes, both in other countries and in other sectors. So we're working currently with friends in Australia, with organisations in the UK, as well as in Singapore and in South Africa, to extend the analysis of companies. And we're also looking at how to develop a relational schools project, a relational hospital project, and down the line a relational churches project, because it's churches above all that should stand out as being relational organizations. And sometimes they are outstanding relational organizations, but sadly sometimes they're not. But we believe that if relationships and quality, good quality of relationships, love ultimately in biblical language, if that is the key to what God is interested in as a relational God, then surely churches should stand out to everybody in the whole country that we live in as the most important and significant relational organization. People should think, if I want to see how to run relationships, what I should do is go to church and I will experience the best possible relationships in the land. Well, if only that could be true, we would flood our churches with people.
That's great. Mike, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.